Today, we explore how this date completely reshaped our world across five powerful dimensions: culture, education, finance, politics, and technology. This day proves that history never rests. Let's dive into the fascinating interconnected events of this date that continue to influence how we live, think, and innovate today. So, without much further ado, let's go.
Imagine 2 million people just stepping out of their homes, walking to the nearest highway and holding hands.
Yeah,
Like, they literally form an unbroken human chain across three different countries.
which is just staggering to picture.
It really is, stretching for hundreds of miles. And then imagine that exactly 50 years earlier, on that exact same day on the calendar, two dictators sat in a highly classified room and just cynically carved up those exact same countries with a pen on a map.
Right.
So today's deep dive is about one specific date, August 23rd, and how looking at the events that happened on this exact day across different centuries, it really reveals this massive overarching narrative about human history.
It definitely does.
We are looking at a really fascinating stack of historical journals, research papers, and articles to untangle this overarching struggle, the struggle between those who try to build walls and those who tear them down.
And for anyone watching our video feed, you can probably see I've set my backdrop today to look like a dimly lit vintage archive room.
Oh, I see that. Yeah, very moody.
Yeah, I've got the old newspaper clippings, the fading legal briefs, and sepia photographs pinned to the walls behind me.
It looks great. Thanks.
It feels appropriate because to truly understand this push and pull between state oppression and human liberation, we really have to start by digging deep into the archives of physical bodily control.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our first arrow focuses entirely on the most visceral, primal struggle against systemic oppression, where marginalized groups are violently pushing back against the state. We are starting on the night of August 22nd into August 23rd, 1791,
Right.
on the French colony of Saint-Domingue, which is what we now know as Haiti.
Yeah, and this is the ignition point of the Haitian Revolution. And to understand the sheer scale of what happened on this exact date, we have to look at the mechanics of the global economy at the time.
Which was just massive.
Oh, absolutely. Saint
Right.
Domingue was arguably the wealthiest colony in the world. I mean, they were producing massive amounts of sugar and coffee for Europe. But that wealth was built entirely on just a brutally efficient, mathematically calculated system of human enslavement. And the plantation owners, they just relied on this arrogant assumption that enslaved people were too fractured, too terrorized to ever organize a unified military resistance.
But the events of August 23rd completely shattered that assumption, didn't they?
Utterly shattered it. The uprising was highly coordinated. I mean, enslaved leaders used the cover of night and these deep religious networks to launch a synchronized rebellion.
Like all at once.
Exactly, across multiple plantations. And the reason this specific date echoes through history isn't just about the local rebellion. It is about how the news of this uprising traveled.
Well, because of the ships.
Right. Maritime trade networks carried the stories of Saint Domingue back to Europe and across the Americas, and it just sent absolute panic through imperial capitals.
Because it proved them wrong.
Exactly. It proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the economic engine of the transatlantic slave trade was fundamentally unstable. The enslaved could and would organize and defeat modern European armies.
That structural collapse of the pro-slavery argument, that's why UNESCO designated August 23rd as the International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition.
Yeah, it's a huge turning point.
It wasn't just a riot, it was the beginning of the end of a global economic system based on literal chains.
Right.
But as we move forward in the timeline, the nature of how the state controls people shifts. It moves from owning physical bodies to controlling ideologies.
Yes.
And that brings us to August 23, 1927, Boston, Massachusetts.
The execution of Nicola Sacco and Bartolomeo Vanzetti, two Italian immigrants who were convicted of a 1920 armed robbery and murder in South Braintree.
And their trial and execution sparked some of the largest global protests of the 20th century. I mean, it was international news.
It was everywhere.
But the controversy surrounding their guilt or innocence, it didn't just fade away after they died. I was reading through the sources, and 50 years later, in 1977, the governor of Massachusetts, Michael Dukakis, he actually issued a formal proclamation stating that Sacco and Vanzetti were unjustly tried.
Yes, he did.
He argued the trial was poisoned by prejudice against them because they were Italians and because they were anarchists.
Which was a very bold move for a governor.
Totally. Now, going through the historical debate here, and I want to be clear to the listeners, our goal today is not to take a political side on this.
Right. Exactly. We're just looking at the sources.
Exactly. We're just looking at the historical debate impartially. Because the Sacco and Vanzetti case acts like a historical Rorschach test.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Yeah, for decades, what people saw in the courtroom transcripts depended entirely on their own political ideologies.
It really did. The historiography on this is deeply, deeply fractured. For a long time, the traditionalist narrative, which was championed by legal minds like Felix Frankfurter, they painted the two men as absolute innocents.
Right, like they were just caught up in the system.
Exactly. They framed them as gentle, philosophical anarchists, utopian thinkers who were railroaded by a xenophobic justice system during the Red Scare.
Right, but then the sources show a shift.
Yeah, starting around the 1960s, a wave of revisionist historians began publishing research arguing that the trial was, well, actually fair, and that one or both of the men were likely guilty of the murders.
So I want to stop and look at the mechanism of that revisionist argument, because the sources get incredibly specific here. The revisionist theory seems to rely heavily on statements made by a prominent anarchist leader named Carlo Tresca.
Right, and let's give a working definition to the different factions of the anarchist movement at the time, because it is central to understanding the flaws in the revisionist theory here.
Okay, lay it out for us.
So Carlo Tresca was an anarcho-syndicalist. That means his mechanism for change was organizing massive labor unions.
Okay, so industrial action.
Right. He wanted to work within the industrial system to orchestrate general strikes and basically bring capitalism to a halt through organized labor.
Got it.
Sacco and Vanzetti, however, belonged to a deeply militant faction called the Gallianisti.
Wait, so they weren't just the gentle philosophers that the traditionalists claimed?
Far from it. The Gallianisti were anarcho-communists who vehemently opposed any formal organization, including labor unions.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Their primary mechanism for change was the violent overthrow of the state through terrorism, specifically bombings and expropriation.
Expropriation meaning?
Which meant robbing banks and payrolls to fund their underground war.
Okay, so if Carlo Tresca was a union organizer and Sacco and Vanzetti belonged to a secretive bomb-making cell that hated unions, why do revisionist historians rely on Tresca to prove Sacco and Vanzetti were guilty?
Well, the revisionists lean on a rumor that in 1942, Carlo Tresca told a Marxist intellectual named Max Eastman, quote, Sacco was guilty, but Vanzetti was not.
That feels incredibly flimsy to me. I mean, if I'm running a highly classified underground terror cell, I'm not going to confess my armed robberies to a guy who runs a rival political faction.
Right. And the historical journals make that exact counterargument. You have to look at how these groups survived. The Gallianistes were actively being hunted by the federal government during the Palmer raids.
Right. It was an incredibly dangerous time for them.
Exactly. Their entire operational model was based on extreme paranoia and absolute secrecy.
Makes sense.
But Carlo Tresca was a highly public figure. He was the guy they went to when they needed a defense lawyer or public agitation. But he was fundamentally an outsider to their violent operations.
Right.
So the idea that he possessed inside knowledge of a specific 1920 payroll robbery, it kind of defies the basic logic of how underground cells operate.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense when you look at it that way.
Which raises an important question, really. How does history remember those who challenge the state apparatus? Depending on the decade and, the historian looking at the file, Sacco and Vanzetti are either innocent martyrs crushed by a prejudiced judge, or they are active domestic terrorists waging an underground war.
And depending on the observer, that ideological division is just, a debate in a courtroom or a newspaper column. But what happens when that kind of cynical ideological division isn't just a debate? What happens when it's a weapon wielded by actual empires?
Yeah.
That's a chilling thought.
And that brings us to August 23, 1939. And we are moving from the state crushing individuals to the state treating millions of human beings like poker chips.
I'm shifting the backdrop behind me for this one. We're moving away from the dusty archives and into something much colder. You should see a massive, stark map of Eastern Europe now, with harsh clinical lines being drawn straight through sovereign nations.
Oh, yeah, that is grim. We are looking at the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed in Moscow between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. On paper, they called it a treaty of non-aggression. But here's where it gets really interesting. The true nature of this agreement was hidden in a secret additional protocol.
Yes.
And I'm looking at this source material, trying to wrap my head around the cognitive dissonance. These two regimes violently hated each other.
Yes. Mortal enemies.
Right. Fascism and Soviet communism were supposed to be the ultimate opposites. So why sign a peace treaty? Because they needed time. And they both wanted territory without having to fight each other for it, at least not yet. The secret protocol was a mechanism for pure, unrestrained empire building. They literally sat in a room with a map of Europe and drew lines to divide the continent into spheres of influence.
It's like two rival mafia bosses drawing lines on a city map in a dark room. They agreed to split the turf to avoid a gang war while they robbed the citizens blind.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy. Germany claimed Western Poland and Lithuania. The Soviet Union claimed Eastern Poland, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, and Bessarabia.
And they just didn't care about the people living there at all.
Not even a little bit. They didn't consult the people. They simply traded entire populations as geographic assets. And the consequences were immediate. Exactly 1 week later, on September 1st, Germany invaded Poland.
Which triggered World War II.
Exactly. And shortly after that, the Soviet Union invaded from the east.
The sources detail the grim realities of what happened when those map lines became actual military borders. Because the Sovietization process wasn't just about, changing flags on a building. It was the systemic dismantling of whole societies.
Yeah, it was forced deportations to Siberian gulags. It was the suppression of local languages and the execution of anyone deemed a threat to the state.
Right.
The sources specifically highlight the Katyn massacre, where the Soviet secret police systematically executed roughly 22,000 Polish military officers and intellectuals in a forest.
And 22,000. Just unimaginable.
It was a calculated decapitation of an entire nation's leadership. And the existence of this secret protocol was so damning to the Soviet narrative of being, anti-imperialist that Moscow just denied it ever existed for decades.
They denied it until the original German copies were presented as evidence during the Nuremberg trials.
Which makes the human response to these cynical map lines so powerful. Like, how do people react to colonial empires trying to divide them?
They push back by forging unprecedented unity. And our sources detailed two massive events that occurred on August 23rd that directly counter the division of 1939.
Let's start by looking at India. Exactly 8 years after the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, August 23rd, 1947.
Right, so Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel officially became India's first deputy prime minister. Now, India had just won its independence, but it wasn't a unified country.
No, not at all.
The British had left behind a fractured subcontinent made up of over 500 semi-autonomous princely states.
And Patel's monumental legacy was peacefully integrating those hundreds of individual states into the newly independent Indian Union.
Which is a crazy logistical feat.
Oh, absolutely. And the mechanism he used is fascinating. He didn't just march in and demand a signature. He used incredible diplomatic leverage. He appealed to their patriotism. He warned them of the economic isolation they would face if they tried to remain independent.
Right, you can't survive on your own out here.
Exactly. And he guaranteed their personal privileges in exchange for ceding defense and foreign affairs to the central government. He pulled the pieces together, effectively erasing those internal borders to create a cohesive nation.
But the most visually stunning example of erasing borders, that happened on the 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, August 23, 1989. The Baltic Way.
Yes.
This is the 2 million people I mentioned at the very beginning of this deep dive.
The logistics required to pull this off in 1989 are just staggering. We are talking about citizens across Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania forming a 675-kilometer continuous human chain.
Just to protest the Soviet occupation.
Right, and they coordinated this entirely without cell phones, the internet, or modern social media.
I was reading about that. The sources explain how they did it, and it is just a masterclass in grassroots organizing. They used special coded radio broadcasts to tell people exactly which mile marker they needed to stand at to ensure the chain didn't break.
Yeah, the precision is incredible.
Local organizers arranged free bus rides to transport people from the cities out into the rural countryside where, the population was sparse. Up to 30% of the native population of these countries stood on the side of the road holding hands while airplanes flew overhead capturing the footage.
30%. That's a third of the country. It was a defining moment of what is now called the Singing Revolution. By standing shoulder to shoulder, they transformed this complex geopolitical dispute into an undeniable, deeply moral visual.
Now, I want to push past just the emotional visual of people holding hands, because the sources reveal a brilliant legal strategy here. This wasn't just a generic plea for freedom. By holding this protest specifically on the 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, they essentially forced Moscow into a legal corner.
They absolutely did. By spotlighting the secret protocols of 1939, the ones that were proven at Nuremberg, the Baltic states established a flawless legal argument. Their premise was simple. If the secret protocols were real, then the Baltic states were illegally occupied by military force.
Meaning they never voluntarily joined the Soviet Union.
Right.
Which means every single Soviet law passed in those countries since 1940 was fundamentally null and void. Like, they didn't need to petition Moscow for a constitutional secession because legally, they argued, they were never part of the Soviet Union to begin with.
Right.
They bypassed the entire Soviet legal framework.
What's fascinating here is the sheer panic this caused in Moscow. I mean, the official Soviet newspaper, Pravda, retaliated by publishing incredibly dark warnings. They accused the Baltic organizers of whipping up nationalist hysteria and warned that they were pushing their people into a catastrophic abyss.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a heavy-handed threat of military intervention.
But the Central Committee never sent the tanks.
No, they didn't.
The sheer scale of the nonviolent solidarity worked. Just 7 months later, Lithuania formally declared its independence, which basically started the domino effect that led to the total collapse of the Soviet Union.
In 1939, dictators secretly divided the map. 50 years later to the day, millions of people used their physical bodies to reconnect it.
And that physical connection leads us directly into our final era today. Because if the Baltic Way proved we could connect across physical borders, just a couple of years later, humanity figured out how to connect without physical bodies or borders at all.
I'm shifting my backdrop one last time here. The map of Europe is fading away, and it's being replaced by an expansive, breathtaking view of a starry cosmos layered with a glowing, pulsing digital network.
Oh, nice. Very sci-fi. We are looking at August 23, 1991, Internet Day. This is the date the World Wide Web officially became accessible to the general public, and the term Internet refers to someone with a deep, exploratory familiarity with the Internet.
Right. And the origins of this borderless network, they trace back to CERN, the European Particle Physics Laboratory. A British computer scientist named Tim Berners-Lee submitted a proposal to his manager for a distributed information management system.
And his manager famously scribbled vague but exciting on the document, right?
Yes. Vague but exciting.
The mechanism of what Berners-Lee built is the ultimate tool for liberation. Before the web, information on computers was completely siloed. You had to log into specific, separate databases to find anything.
It was incredibly tedious.
Yeah. But Berners-Lee created hypertext, the ability to click a link on one document and instantly jump to a document hosted on a completely different computer anywhere in the world.
But the true genius wasn't just the code, it was the distribution.
Because he refused to patent it.
Exactly. By August 1991, Berners-Lee was posting on public news groups, inviting anyone with a computer to join the network for free. He deliberately designed a system with no central gatekeepers, no licensing fees, and no geographic borders.
It was the total democratization of human knowledge.
It really was.
And if we look at our final source, we see that exact same ethos of democratization expanding beyond the Earth itself. On August 23, 2023, India's space agency, ISRO, made history with the successful lunar landing of their Chandrayaan-3 mission.
And when you look at the origins of ISRO, which is outlined in the Carnegie Endowment piece we have, it completely breaks the mold of how we usually think about space exploration.
Right, because during the Cold War, the space race between the U.S. and the Soviets was largely an extension of military posturing.
Yeah, developing rockets to prove they could deliver intercontinental ballistic missiles.
But ISRO was founded in 1963 by Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, and their first launch station was literally set up inside an old church in a small fishing hamlet in Kerala. It was the furthest thing imaginable from a secret military bunker.
Sarabhai possessed a purely socioeconomic vision. He believed that a developing nation couldn't afford not to invest in space because space technology was the ultimate tool for domestic uplift.
Can you give an example of that?
Sure. A perfect example of this mechanism in action is the 1975 SITE experiment. ISRO partnered with NASA to borrow a satellite, and they used it to beam educational television programs directly into 2,400 of the most remote, isolated villages in India.
Programs about what?
Covering agriculture, health, family planning. They bypassed the need to build thousands of miles of physical cables and infrastructure on the ground, using outer space to democratize information.
That is incredible. So what does this all mean? We started today by looking at a single, seemingly arbitrary number on a calendar.
August 23rd.
Exactly. But by following the thread of this day, we have witnessed the constant friction of human history. We saw the visceral breaking of physical chains in Haiti in 1791. We examined the fierce ideological battles over the state's right to execute Sacco and Vanzetti in 1927.
We watched dictators carve up millions of lives with a pen in 1939.
Only to see 2 million people hold hands to erase those lines in 1989. And finally, we saw humanity shatter the concept of borders entirely, launching the open web in 1991 and peaceful knowledge-sharing missions to the moon in 2023.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves that history is not a static textbook of dates. It is a living, breathing struggle. It is the perpetual tension between the powerful few who want to hoard control and draw lines on a map, and the collective, many who want to share power and connect the world.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Something that bridges the history we've discussed today with the reality we are living in right now. We celebrate Internet Day as the birth of a decentralized open web. But look at how governments and massive tech monopolies operate today.
Oh, yeah.
They are increasingly walling off the internet, trapping our data in proprietary silos, and censoring what we can see based on our geographic location.
Which goes against the whole idea of 1991.
Exactly. Are we quietly allowing them to draft new digital Molotov-Ribbentrop pacts? Are we letting them divide our borderless web into isolated spheres of influence? Or will the internets of tomorrow need to figure out how to organize a digital Baltic way just to keep our human connections free?
That is a great question to leave on.
Keep questioning the narratives, keep exploring your sources, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Hi viewers, family and friends. How did you like the content of this video? Like the video and subscribe to the channel. Please write in the comments your name and the place you are watching from. Since our viewing family is spread all over the world, it will be nice to know which city and the country you are watching from, so I can say hello to you. Science and technology. Reading and listening to the historical accomplishments on this date of those who have gone before us, I, as a professional engineer with interest in structural engineering, energy-efficient buildings, ICF construction, and as Google Docs expert with interest in spreadsheet-based solutions, draw inspiration to ask of myself the million-dollar question. What would I accomplish today? Think about the Japanese practice of Kaizen. Let me know in the comments, what would you accomplish today? Your subscribing to the channel inspires me to post more such videos. Thanks for your patronage. See you in the next video. Sincerely, Yogi Anand.